Hi, everyone, and welcome to UBS Trending. I'm Anthony Pastori. As many of you know, New York City got hit particularly hard during and after the COVID shutdowns, from restaurants to family-owned businesses to entertainment venues. But you really can't talk about New York City without talking about the MTA. We're talking the subways, buses, tunnels, more than that. There's a lot going on that the MTA is managing in and around New York. So how are things looking from a ridership perspective? And is the MTA out of the woods financially? Well, let's talk about that right now with my guest, Ted Galgano from the UBS Chief Investment Office. Ted, good to see you. And
You too, Anthony.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're a rider yourself. I know you take Metro North when you're commuting into the city. I take the subway.
Yep, I do.
It's always an interesting experience, especially during these post-COVID times.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yep.
Mask, no mask.
That's right, exactly. Wondering who's getting on, who's getting off. Sometimes it's crowded, sometimes it's not.
Right.
But getting to the point at heart, the MTA, I was reading that they hired McKinsey & Company, and what they were hired to do was kind of take a look at their ridership projections, and then they released, after that, their July plan update. So
Right.
I think a lot of us would be curious to know how the update looked, what was in there that the MTA was reviewing.
So the MTA was reviewing ridership and what they expect it to be now between then and their plan period of 2026, which is what their July plan updates. So when we looked at the February plan, ridership was expected to increase through the end of this year up to around 80% of pre-pandemic levels. Unfortunately, they have really fallen off that. Omicron virus, or variant I should say, really set them back in early January and February, and they haven't progressed past around 60% or so of pre-pandemic levels, and they've kind of leveled off there. So McKinsey's study, which updated plans for ridership, really shows that they're not going to get back to 2019 levels till somewhere around mid-2030, 2035.
Wow, that's a long way off.
It's a long set off. So operating revenues have really fallen off. The Fairbach operating ratio, which they used to be world-class in at around 54% or so, if you see on that chart there, they were best in class. So the first thing that shows you is that transit operators are heavily subsidized. MTA was doing really well, but now they're dropped to about 30% of operating ratios. So that's really going to blow a hole in their budget going forward.
Well, I guess this begs the question, and we're going to talk about because I know they've got transportation revenue bonds that the MTA holds. We're going to talk about those. But when you think about the ridership levels, Ted, how big of an impact does that really have on the MTA? Because they are a lot of, you said transportation agencies, they're subsidized. There was a lot of COVID relief that came to New York City's way, particularly to support the MTA. So when these ridership levels, as you said, they're not going to pick up to 2019 levels until 2030, 2035, whatever it is, how much does that impact the MTA overall?
So it has a very big effect on them. So they did receive about $14.5 billion in COVID relief funds, which was tremendous help. And it was meant to provide them with a bridge to their new normal, whatever that was going to be. So at this point in time, the original game plan and in the February plan, which was really their operating budget for the year, they were expecting federal aid to carry them through 2025. In other words, they were just going to take that federal aid and plug the deficit every year until 2025. And in 2026, they would hit what they were calling the financial cliff, which is where they'd have a $2.6 billion deficit. As you can see by those projections, the July projections really, and the blue bars there, really got a lot bigger. The deficit grew in main part because ridership has fallen. Obviously, inflation has something to do with that. They have higher costs for gas and for electricity, but most of that increase in the deficit in just 5 months, it's a 45% increase in deficits over the plan period.
Wow.
That's how much ridership matters.
Wow.
From that perspective. So we'll see where it goes. But they're looking at about $2.5 billion a year roughly in deficits between now and 2026, which is their current plan period.
It's interesting, Ted, because I think a lot of folks who take the subway, especially on a normal day, and even the commuter rails, Long Island Railroad and the Metro North, which you take, we definitely feel like something is maybe not being supported as much as it was in the past because they're having to maybe cut back where they can because of the deficit. So it seems clear, and I could be wrong, maybe it's just a feeling of being that sort of angry, jaded New Yorker on a hot subway. I'm like, this is awful, you know? But maybe nothing's really changed. But it seems like from what you're saying, the MTA does have some pretty tough decisions to make. So what options do they have, and what are they going to have to continue to provide safe, reliable rides? What do they have to do here?
So the first thing is, one of the first tough decisions they're going to have to face, and Kevin Willens, the CFO, brought this up at their last board meeting, is how do we use the financial aid to help us bridge, right? The bridge maybe no longer is the proper term, right? Because as he said, the new normal is here. We're at more of our standard, what we think we're going to be going forward. What he wants to do is spread that federal aid out over more years rather than just bucket it and hit that financial cliff, and kind of start addressing some of the deficits now to make the aid last longer. What will that entail? You have three main things maybe you can tackle. You can cut expenditures, right? But unfortunately, there was a report out by the New York State Comptroller, Thomas DiNapoli, who cited that, even though transit and bus service in particular, operating expenses were cut dramatically during COVID, you didn't see that corresponding cut on the expenditure side because much of their expenditures are fixed in nature.
Right.
So cutting service may not really help and may start that death spiral of, if I have to wait longer, if I have less reliable service, I'm not going to use mass transit, and you lose more fare box revenue. Right. So they're concerned about that. On the revenue side, certainly there's some things they can do internally that I think people are going to look for. Fare evasion was a problem pre-COVID, became a much bigger problem during COVID, and a lot of people are still evading fares, not paying. They have to get that under control, and certainly there's a security issue. We've seen real events in the subway system. People have to feel safe in order to want to go back. And the subway system is the main driver of their revenues. Out of all of their self-generated revenues, transit is number one by far. So they really have to get the transit system to feel safe so ridership comes back. And the last lever that they can pull is their capital improvement program. They have quite a large program in place right now, and a lot of that was to help expand service, which with lower ridership they probably don't need to do, or maybe don't need to do. So they probably have to reduce the size of their capital improvement program.
Can they reallocate those funds to supporting some of the things that are lacking?
Well, they could, but in a lot of ways, the capital improvement program is usually bonded, so it's in the form of debt service. So it's not necessarily savings today. It will lower debt service in future allocations or from the operating budget. But they can't cut their way out of this problem. They're going to have to look to outside sources for help, which really is the state.
Right, which is probably not an unlikely scenario for a lot of municipalities along in the country. But certainly we could see just from looking at some of those charts, the MTA system is the largest. Certainly in the country, it might be the largest in the world. I don't know the actual stats for it, but
it is by far the largest in the U.S. They are 7.6 times bigger, as you can see on the chart there, than Chicago, which is the second largest transit system in our country. The MTA has more bus service, more rail service than anybody else, but the number of rail cars and commuter rail cars that they have is larger than all the other systems in the country combined.
You can clearly see it just from looking at the blue chart versus the little yellow ones. And I say little being like very specifically, they're very small. So, but going back to what I was mentioning before, these transportation revenue bonds, with all the discussion of these large operating deficits and all the nuances of what you just described, should investors be concerned about them?
So first, let me just be clear to your point. We are talking about the transit revenue bonds. The MTA has various different securities that they issue under payroll mobility tax, the Triborough Bridge and revenue bonds. We're not talking about those. Those securities don't rely on fare box revenue, so only the transportation revenue bonds do. In our view, going back to your question, should we be worried? Default risk has risen, but remains contained. It really does. So why would I say that? And it all goes back to the essentiality of what service the MTA provides to New York City, but specifically to the state, what it matters to the GDP. And New York State provides one of the largest GDPs of the country. I think we're the third largest. So, how does New York City operate without New York City Transit, without the buses, without the subway, without rail, right?
Not very well.
Not very well. The MTA network provides 80% of commuters to the central business district. That's how they get there, is through mass transit, right? So New York City's landlocked. There's nowhere else you can add more roads, more highways to bring more cars in. You need the MTA. On top of that, it really is a cost thing. New York City residents, less than 50% of them own a car, right? So you'd have to go out and buy a car, insure a car, parking. I don't know.
It's a small
monthly
fortune.
parking pass is around $800 a month.
I was going to say it's more than some people's rents in other cities.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's really an affordability issue. So that's why it's always been subsidized, but now really we need to increase the size of the subsidies. So because of that essentiality, we do believe the federal government, state government, city government will step up and find a way to help the MTA through, as they have through other shocks like 9/11, Superstorm Sandy, and certainly, as we just referenced earlier, the $14.5 billion they received for coronavirus.
COVID. Right, exactly.
So those things really help bring the essentiality to the forefront. But based on the challenges the MTA is facing today, we do believe, and investors should believe, that there's going to be more pricing and rating volatility around the name. That should be fully accepted at this point. But it is our view that there remains a low level of default risk in the short to medium term, let's say.
It's great to hear. Ted, thank you so much. It's a great, very interesting conversation, especially for anybody who lives in and around the New York area, but people who have visited here, they really know the impact that public transportation really does have. And I think other people who live outside of New York can't fathom not having a car to get around, but
right.
You don't even want one here because
No.
it's the traffic, the roads, the way to get around. It's very challenging. It's easier to hop on a train.
Yeah, most people I know that own a car in New York City say how little they use it.
That's right.
Because mass transit's so good and because it is so difficult to get around. And if you're staying in the city, you need to pay for parking somewhere else. Once you get it out of your parking,
That's exactly
for,
right.
So.
And like you said, parking in the city for on a monthly charge, it's through the roof.
Like
Astronomical.
$800 a month or so, I think, on average
Absolutely.
for a monthly. And, go park in Midtown for 2 hours, you're going to pay $50.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean,
just to have somebody not
welcome
even really
to New
watch
York.
it. And they say they're not responsible for any scratches or dings. I'm like, that's not a
right.
place I want to park. Anyway, Ted, good to see you. Thanks so much
you,
for the
Anthony.
conversation.
Appreciate it.
Great. And for more information, you can visit our website, ubs.com/views. Lots of content there from Ted and the rest of the Chief Investment Office. And make sure to follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, plus all of our past UBS Trending episodes are available on demand. And if you have any questions about your own portfolio, make sure to speak with a financial advisor. Until next time, I'm Anthony Pastore. We hope you have a great day, and remember to keep your eyes on what's trending. See you soon, everybody.